Hi there, I'm Jake Donnelly. And while that last name might make it seem like I'm somebody that shouldn't be talking about Jewish issues, not only am I Jewish, in fact, I'm an Israeli citizen. As I made Aliyah, I moved to Israel and lived in Israel for several years. And in fact, my job right now, while living in the United States, is to work on combating anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. So with that being said, when the Biden administration rolled out its plan to combat anti-Semitism, my interest was piqued. However, after reading all 60 pages of the plan and watching the rollout videos and the symposium that they had afterwards, I'm here to tell you that the plan to combat anti-Semitism is not a plan to combat anti-Semitism. So here's the real issue. It's a plan to combat white nationalism. Now, is a plan to combat white nationalism a good thing? Yes, it is. Very much so. White nationalism is, in fact, on the rise in the United States. However, is this a plan to actually combat Jew hatred, to combat anti-Semitism? No. No, it's not. Nowhere in the plan will you see anything to combat left-wing anti-Semitism. So this isn't a plan to combat anti-Semitism. It's actually a Trojan horse and a shield to make it so that those that hate Israel, because it's the land of the Jews, will be shielded, defended from accusations of anti-Semitism. Now, how did that come to be? In the days leading up to the rollout of the plan, there were rumblings about what definition of anti-Semitism the plan was going to use. That might not seem like a big thing, but here's the thing. Anti-Semitism is a problem in the United States, and if you want to fix a problem, you must define the problem. The problem, according to the Biden White House, is that anti-Semitism is on the rise in the United States. Yes, that's correct. Good job, everybody. But what's the definition of anti-Semitism? What does it mean to be a Jew hater? In the days before the rollout, there was a discussion as to if it was going to be the IRA definition of anti-Semitism or the Nexus definition of anti-Semitism. Well, according to the plan, it's both. It endorses the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, the definition of anti-Semitism brought to you by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, but at the same time, it welcomes the Nexus definition of anti-Semitism. The main problem with that is the two are at loggerheads. Because the IRA definition of anti-Semitism agrees with the Nexus definition of Jew hatred in terms of American anti-Semitism. But where they diverge is when it comes to the country of Israel. Because in the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, those that offend the 3 Ds, which is demonization, delegitimization, and double standard in conversations and criticisms as it pertains to Israel, that's how you can figure out if somebody is being an anti-Semite as opposed to just lobbying, or I should say, sending valid criticism of Israel. As opposed to the Nexus definition, which actually says you're allowed, when talking about and criticizing Israel, you're allowed to use a double standard. So the IRA definition says no double standard is allowed, and those that use a double standard are being anti-Semites. The Nexus definition says a double standard is allowed, and it's still very difficult to figure out who is being an anti-Semite when they talk about the land of the Jews. So one, we have a definitional problem when it comes to the Biden plan to fight anti-Semitism. Now that's bad. Everybody's been talking about CARE, the Council for American Islamic Relations, and the fact that that's an anti-Semitic organization and therefore should have no place in the discussion about Jew hatred and anti-Semitism. And people that have lobbed that critique, they are correct. But I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about the fact that this is a plan to combat white nationalism. And so, secondarily, what we have is a definitional problem, but after that, you have the inclusion of DEI. Of course, most people have heard about it, but if it needs to be said again, DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. The problem is DEI is actually something that promotes anti-Semitism. It does so in one way in the United States, and it does so in another way in Israel. So how does this happen? How does something that is promoted by the Biden administration, by Deborah Lipstadt, by Doug Emhoff, how does it miss the ball entirely and promote a practicum that actually promotes anti-Semitism, the titular thing that they say they are fighting against? Well, let's first talk about DEI as it pertains to the United States. In a nutshell, distilled down to its bare bones, DEI is a cultural Marxist practicum, where primarily it's about power hierarchies. And that word in the middle, equity, is the most important word about DEI, because equity is all about equal outcomes. The issue that you get there is if you start grouping people into these minorities, as in, let's say, the Black American minority or the Jewish minority, if you are trying to produce equal outcomes and those two groups aren't level on certain subjects, then what you're actually doing is throttling back, putting the brakes on the ones that are ahead while giving more of a free pass to those that are behind. And so, when it happens that a lot of left-wing anti-Semitism is actually coming from minorities themselves, then we can't talk about it. Because we can't do anything when it's the minority beating up a minority if the minority we're talking about is the more oppressed one. So, in the history of the United States, while Jews have had a bad history in the United States, and my name's Jake Donnelly, I've got the Irish and the Jewish, so my familial background, my ethnicity, is not the type of ethnicity that has been classically welcomed here in the United States, but that pales in comparison to what black people obviously have had to endure over the 400 plus years in the United States and previously to that, the Commonwealth and America, right? So, black people are essentially allowed to get away with beating the hell out of Orthodox Jews in New York City. And nobody talks about that because of DEI. Because in the framework, the perspective of power hierarchies with cultural Marxism, Jews are more powerful in the United States. Black Americans are not. Therefore, if the ones that are less powerful, if the oppressed are actually the ones literally hitting and assaulting the quote-unquote more powerful in America, you can't say anything about the oppressed doing that, because the oppressed, they are actually expected to do something, to rise up, to toss off the chains, the yoke of oppression that has been forced upon them. Now, it's not Jews that have done that, but it's still Jews that are catching the brunt, the literal brunt of it. And the only time that that is mentioned, in fact, in the entire 60 pages of the report is on, I think it's page 56, but it's in Appendix A. It is literally after the report is over, and it doesn't explicitly state what the issue is. All it says is that the Orthodox in New York City are actually the ones that are bearing the burden of being the victims of anti-Semitic hate crimes in the United States. It makes no mention about the perpetrators. Now, it makes no mention about the perpetrators in these anti-Semitic incidences in New York City, while at the same time, every single time there's a white nationalist, white supremacist instance in the 60 pages, that's called out by name. Charlottesville, Colleyville, New Jersey, Maryland, numerous instances called out by name. But when it comes to the Orthodox Jews in New York City, the perpetrators in those instances are never called out. So what's the reason? It's because of the DEI perspective of those that rolled out this quote-unquote plan to combat anti-Semitism, which again is not combating anti-Semitism, it's only combating right-wing anti-Semitism, which primarily comes in the guise of white nationalism. Now, secondarily, there's no real mention of Israel. There's quite literally no mention of Zionism throughout the entire 60 pages. And in fact, when it talks about anti-Semitism, that phrase and word is used over and over again, but so too is other forms of hate. In fact, other forms of hate is used 48 different times in the document. And it really works against what it's purportedly doing. But so you have the United States version of why DEI is bad, and that's because we can't call out left-wing anti-Semitism where minorities are beating the hell out of Jews in the United States, and at the same time, and this is the most pernicious part of the quote-unquote plan, is that you can't call out anti-Semites who are manifesting their anti-Semitism in the guise of anti-Zionism. Now, why does that happen? Well, for the same reason we talked about with the oppressor versus oppressed narrative. Israel is the powerful one in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So they are the oppressors, whereas the Palestinians, they are the oppressed. Now, there's no mention of terrorism. Literally, that word is not used more than 2 times in the entire document. The document does say that every time that somebody tries to delegitimize Israel, it must be called out. But then the next day, literally the next day after this plan was rolled out, CUNY, the City of University New York school, their law school, had their graduation speaker give you example 1A of anti-Semitism in the guise of anti-Zionism. Yet nobody that helped with this plan called it out. Not Joe Biden, not Kamala Harris, not Doug Emhoff, and not even Deborah Lipstadt. Nobody called out this speech, one of the most anti-Semitic speeches in recent history, using all the classical tropes of the Jews having power. But the plan says that they must call it out. In fact, it's a call to action over and over again in the plan. But did anybody call out this specific type of anti-Semitism? No, they didn't. They didn't because this anti-Semitism is anti-Zionism. And it's overt anti-Semitism. But again, nobody called it out, which is why the inclusion, the welcoming of the nexus definition is so malevolent in this plan. And why it makes it so obvious that this is not a plan to combat anti-Semitism. This is merely a plan to combat white nationalism. Now, should there be a plan to do that? Absolutely. But there is something different, unique about anti-Semitism, and it's mentioned in the plan itself. And that is the fact that anti-Semitism is all about, at least classically speaking, conspiracy theories. The fact that Jews run the world, that Jews are the puppet masters pulling the strings behind the scenes. That's how you get a tweet like Ilhan Omar's all about the Benjamins. That's what she's referencing, that it's the evil, dirty Jew money that is doing all the work behind the scenes. That's classic anti-Semitism. And the speaker, who I'm not going to dignify by using her name, she used the blood libel in her speech. So that, again, classic anti-Semitism, but because her primary focus in that speech was not against Jews in America, but was more against Israel, that was then allowed. So this isn't a plan at all. It's a Trojan horse. It's a shield for anti-Semites against accusations of anti-Semitism. Essentially, all you have to do now to get away with anti-Semitism here in the United States, according to the plan itself, is to simply say, I don't like the state of Israel. You don't have to give any real example beyond you just don't like Jews. But so long as you couch it in hatred of Israel, in this narrative of oppressor versus oppressed, of a power imbalance, then it's okay. And that's why this thing is so disgusting. It's malevolent. It is everything. It's a Trojan horse to sneak in an acceptable form of anti-Semitism so that everybody who is an anti-Semite can say, look at the plan right here. The plan says I'm not being an anti-Semite because the plan says I'm not being an anti-Semite. So instead of combating anti-Semitism and instead of taking on the tidal wave of anti-Semitism that is coming from the left, and yeah, there are ripples and there is an increase in anti-Semitism on the right, and it must be called out. Every time that anti-Semitism occurs on the right, it must be called out. But so too should anti-Semitism be called out every time it happens on the left. But both the right and the left are too worried about currying votes. They're too worried about upsetting people who are anti-Semites. But this is what the plan should have said. If you're an anti-Semite, you are going to get called out. You are going to get ostracized. Because we don't want you. Not only do we not want you, more specifically, we don't want your vote. But the Biden administration rolled out this plan while thinking, we must do something so that we do not ostracize the Rashida Tlaibs, the Ilhan Omars, and the Bernie Sanderses, right? We need to figure out a way where we can thread that needle, square that circle of having anti-Semites in our own caucus while not calling them out. And that's what this plan did. It talked exclusively about right-wing anti-Semitism, white nationalism, neo-Nazism, as it should have, but not exclusively. That's not the exhaustive list right now of anti-Semitism in the United States. In fact, on college and university campuses, anti-Semitism is most prominently coming in the form of anti-Zionism, of lying, of saying that Israel is an apartheid state. Israel, with its members in the government who are actually Arabs, members of the Muslim Brotherhood, who are hell-bent on destroying the state of Israel. There are Arab judges, there are Arab politicians, there are Arab doctors. There's no apartheid in Israel. And anybody that says that doesn't know what apartheid means. It's an insult to the history of those who experienced apartheid in Africa. But the final thing that this plan to combat anti-Semitism does that is so bad is that term, other forms of hate. Anti-Semitism is unique. Anti-Semitism, as I said before, is about conspiracy theories. It is a type of hatred that is unlike any other hatred in the world. But the term other forms of hate is used 48 times. So instead of treating anti-Semitism on its own merits, that it is in fact a unique form of hate, it doesn't do that. It lops it in with all the other forms of hate. So it actually takes the thing that makes anti-Semitism so terrible, the conspiracy theory aspect of it, and sheds it. It excises it from the definition of anti-Semitism. So how do you combat anti-Semitism if you're not going to combat the anti-Semites? Yes, get rid of the ones on the right side, but also get rid of the ones on the left. Because that right, left are the ones that we want to fight. We want to fight all anti-Semites, no matter where they come from. And the response by the Jewish organizations that all said, what a great job, shame on you. An absolute shanda by every single one of these Jewish organizations that pretends to care about combating anti-Semitism. This entire plan has nothing to do with anti-Semitism in of itself. 48 times the term other forms of hate was used during this plan. Orthodox, as in Orthodox Jews, 3 times. That's it. Trust me. Look up how many times Orthodox was said. Look up how many times kosher was said. 7. But look up how many times halal was said. 7. Other forms of hate. 48 times. In a plan to combat anti-Semitism, the term other forms of hate was used 48 times. Now they're correct because they say, look, you have to start with anti-Semitism because that bleeds into other forms of hate. And those that hate Jews also tend to hate everybody else. That's true, but anti-Semitism is a unique form of hate. And when you lump it in with the rest, you're not elevating the rest of those hates. You're actually bringing anti-Semitism down to a level that it does not belong, both in modernity as well as in the classical definition of it. So, to borrow a line from Mike Judge's cult classic Office Space, I ask you, Deborah Lipstadt, I ask you, Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, Doug Emhoff, what exactly do you do here? If this plan only is about fighting white nationalism and completely dismisses an entire spectrum of anti-Semitism, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And more importantly, to the Jewish organizations that are using this as a metric to figure out and to say, look, this is how we're going to fight anti-Semitism, what's wrong with you? Because you're not fighting anti-Semitism, you're fighting white nationalism, a good endeavor. But this was a plan to fight anti-Semitism, and it does not fight anti-Semitism. In fact, this is a plan to fight other forms of hate. That's what this is. And anti-Semitism is just lumped in there with the rest. So if you want to fight anti-Semitism, fight it on the right. If you want to fight anti-Semitism, fight it on the left. Right, left, right, left, doesn't matter. Fight anti-Semitism wherever it occurs. Because Jew hatred is wrong. Hatred of any kind for no reason is wrong. Hating somebody because of their immutable characteristics is wrong. That's what Martin Luther King Jr. was about. But that's not what DEI is about. DEI says, I can look at your immutable characteristics, and I know who is good, I know who is bad. I know who is oppressor, I know who is oppressed. Israel, oppressor. Palestinians, oppressed. Black people, oppressed. Therefore, every other minority. And even though Jews are a super minority, as in a smaller section of the population in the United States, an actual minority vis-a-vis the other minority of Black Americans, we can't do that. We can't call that out. So again, I ask everybody that actually cares about fighting anti-Semitism, if you approve of this plan, if you think this plan is good, why? What do you think this plan does? Because I've read it. I've listened to the people. And I know what this plan says, and I know what this plan does, and worse, I know what this plan is going to do. This plan is going to combat white nationalism. Good. But this plan is going to shield anti-Semites from accusations of anti-Semitism. And we can't have that happen. If we want to win this fight, we must fight the anti-Semites wherever they are. On the boats, on the planes, on the beaches, wherever anti-Semitism, wherever Jew hatred occurs, you have to fight. Right or left, the votes shouldn't matter. And the fact that it does makes me know, not think, know, that you don't actually care about fighting anti-Semitism. You just want the votes. You just want it to look like you do. And that's the worst thing in the world. Because you're defending anti-Semites, you're providing them a shield from accusations of anti-Semitism in the quickest, fastest, most rapidly increasing form of anti-Semitism. You did not say a single thing about it. So shame, I hate saying this, but shame on all of you. This plan is the most problematic thing I have seen in quite some time because I know how it's going to be used. It's going to be used so that Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Bernie Sanders, Roger Waters, all the people that hate Jews, they can say, I don't hate Jews. I'm not an anti-Semite. Look at the plan. The plan says I'm not. And you know what? According to the plan, those people aren't anti-Semites. But they are. So we got to figure out a way to do that better. And it's not by following this plan. And I'm sorry right before Shabbat to bring this terrible news to you, but hey, nobody else is saying it, so I guess I have to. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.